Good morning, everyone. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of AELEX to this webinar series on international trade. My name is Soji Ahubadi. I'm the practice head for international trade in the firm, and it is my pleasure to be acting as moderator for this session, very important session. It is very clear to everyone now that intra-Africa trade will happen. If it is that clear, we then need to know what rules we will have to operate. When rules are set, they will need to be kept. And therefore, it is important that not only the letter of the rules, but also the essence of the rules are understood by all players in the market. A very integral portion of rule setting in international trade, and indeed in national trade, is the setting of standards. The setting of standards for goods, as well as even for services, such that everyone is aware of what the rules are, and they will be obliged to keep them if they wish to trade in the market. Standards are set for a good number of reasons which do not need overstating. Standards are set to ensure quality of goods. Standards are set to ensure compatibility of goods. Standards are set to give access to information and technology for mutual development, for diffusion of new knowledge. Standards are also set for economies of scale, because when they are set, they lower the barriers to trade. But by far from the trader's point of view, standards are essential to lower transaction costs. In the case of Africa, the characterization of the trading population is particularly significant. If the economies of Africa were run only by sophisticated and regulated trading organizations, there will be no need to preach this morning's sermon. But realizing that 80% of our trade in Africa is still done by small and medium-scaled enterprises, including micro enterprises, it is important to preach this gospel of standards, especially also realizing that 70% of our population is engaged in this sector. Therefore, AELEX has recognized the need to support government and its agencies in preaching the gospel of standardization, such that no one will be caught unawares and no one will be left behind. It is for this reason that we have decided to assemble the galaxy of those who have not just practiced, but also experienced the setting and observance and maintaining of standards. Regulating of standards is the business of some of these individuals. Setting is that of some of the others. Yet still, there are umbrella organizations which are set to harmonize and collate standards. Therefore, it is with great pleasure that we have been able to assemble experts from each of these strains of the activity. The theme of this webinar is the role of standards, the place of standards in international trade. Although this is a topic being taken by or instigated by a Nigerian law firm, we hope that the lessons to be learned will go around the whole of Africa and to our trading partners outside of Africa, that we're ready not only to set, but also to observe standards. Therefore, distinguished participants, please allow me to welcome our panelists for this event as we listen to a goodwill message in person from the Director General of the Nigerian Office of Trade Negotiations, Ambassador Yunus Aga, who will kick off the proceedings today. Ambassador Aga, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Soji, and thank you, panelists and participants. I wish to commend AELEX for this initiative. It's highly commendable and very well opportune. Some of the challenges that many countries, particularly in Africa, have faced with participation in international trade is by looking at one arm of the so-called market access story. If we look at the EPAs that we had, or the Cotonou, the AGOA, all these just look at the tariff preferences that we get. We do not really address the other core aspects of market access, which is the non-tariff barriers. So from a business point of view, to fully benefit from trade, the simple model is you ask yourself, what is the product? Where is the market? What are the standards in that market? What is the size of that market? It is these that will now help you to come home and determine your factory size to meet the market, the technology to address the quality in the market. You can also then decide what happens between your factory gate or farm gate and the market. So those are the logistics and supply chain elements. These are basic conceptual approaches. And for us in Nigeria, and I think many African countries, we have always underrated the importance of non-tariff measures. And therefore, what we do very often is we lose competitiveness. Ability to meet standards can be cumbersome, particularly for SMEs, can be even for big companies. It can also be complex to the extent that it adds to trade costs. So what we need all the time is to ensure that the issues of standards are handled in a transparent manner so that everybody can find its way around. So you have the issues of notification of the standards that you may have. You have issues of what would be the inspection, testing, and certification procedures. In some cases, the model is traceability. So from which factory the product is coming from, or which farm is the product coming from. So all these are key in having a trade enabling environment for the business sector. What we have tried to do since I came in last year at the NOTM is to approach this from a very pragmatic angle. First, we have put in place a draft FTA template for Nigeria, which covers almost all areas. What will be left is when we identify a partner, then we will now decide what the scoping would be. If it is goods only, we focus only on the goods articles of the FTA. If it includes services and any other areas, we can just shuffle around the articles and create the FTA template. We are also working, we are put in place now, draft mutual recognition agreements or templates, let me say, templates for standards, and another template for professional qualifications, which we deal with services. We look forward to bringing all these templates to stakeholders for consultations, for inputs, and subsequent approval by government. I believe this is a good conversation that can even create a standards industry in Nigeria. You don't need to rely solely on some and its laboratories. Depending on how you scope the conversation, depending on how you design your mutual recognition agreements, different stakeholders can put in place facilities to test and certify products in a manner that will enable or facilitate trade. So I'm happy that AELEX has taken up this initiative. We look forward to collaborating with all stakeholders in making sure Nigeria benefits from the AFCFTA, from its participation in trade. We reduce the costs that are associated with standards for our SMEs, and we can also, through this framework, enhance the growth and development of a standards sector in the country. We hope to build the capacity of the private sector, particularly SMEs. And the idea is, like I said, what if you go through the schedules of tariff commitments for the AFCFTA, you can see which products are going to be liberalized in terms of tariff lines. You can then begin to look at what's the size of the market. Is the tariff liberalization commercially meaningful? Because for many countries, the liberalization is focused around where they already have low tariffs. But once we are able to establish that it's commercially meaningful, we can then begin to look at how do we address the standards? How do you then get the business committee to understand what it takes? How do you get the regulatory framework here in Nigeria, the key actors, NAFDAC, SON, plant quarantine, together to now create some recognition agreement in such a way that what is tested and certified in Nigeria is acceptable in the importing countries without any further subject to inspection, which may require more costs, which will create time delays and make those products less competitive. So that's all I have for now for you. I'm happy. I may not stay with you all through because I was shortchanged, so I didn't quite plan to be with you all day. But I hope that your conversation will be practical, will be actual, taking into account the fact that some of the problems we have today in Nigeria, for example, and I believe in many African countries, happened during our structural adjustment regime, when we suddenly woke up and started doing away with our state trading enterprises, which had the role of standard setting and standard kind of clearance for many of our produce. Today, the farmers and producers are left at their whims and caprices, and there have been sharp practices which have led, in many cases, to the devaluation, or how do I call it, of our exports. Because once you send it and the man says, oh, this does not meet the standards, you begin to beg for him to accept because you can't take it back. And this is a bad experience for any businessman who has invested so much in trade. So I thank you all, and I thank Soji and his team for putting in place the webinar, and I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Aga. We did not expect any less from you. You're a man with a heavy desk. We will let you go as soon as you want to go. But I'm sure that you will do your best to stay around for as long as that is possible. Thank you once again for sparing the time and your thoughts on this very important webinar theme. Let us quickly go ahead and listen to the point of view, or is it the speech from the throne? Because the throne of standards in Nigeria is the Standards Organization of Nigeria. And we have no less a person than Malam Farouk Salim, who is the Director General and Chief Executive of the Standards Organization of Nigeria. Malam Salim is a graduate of the Ahmadu Bello University, and he is a pharmacist. He has added to his pharmacy qualifications in business administration from very reputable institutions of the world. He was appointed head of the Standards Organization in September 2020. And since his appointment, he has made very remarkable strides in restructuring that institution for greater efficiency and effectiveness. Malam Salim is unable to join us today. And to stand in his stead is no other than Madam Fibian Arumemi, a lady that I have had the greatest pleasure in interfacing with on issues of standards over time. As a matter of fact, it is as if Ambassador Aga was in our conversations when he mentioned SON, i.e. Standards Organization of Nigeria, repeatedly in his opening statement. So let me yield the floor to Mrs. Fibian Arumemi of the Standards Organization of Nigeria as she speaks to her topic, consideration, understanding the standards and conformity assessments for MSMEs. Thank you, Madam. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, I want to be sure you can hear me.
I can hear you, Madam, loud and clear.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Soji. Good afternoon, Ambassador, SG, distinguished participants. I present greetings from the Director General of the Standards Organization of Nigeria, Malam Farouk Salim, who is unavoidably absent due to other pressing engagement, but has sent me to represent him and also convey his appreciation to the team at AELEX for putting up this program. It shows that the subject of standards is being to receive its due consideration in terms of support for manufacturing, trade, and investments. So our presentation by the Director General is on understanding standards and conformity assessments as a key consideration for MSMEs. This is the outline, and I won't waste too much of your time. I want you to go along with me as I progress on this presentation within the 20 minutes that I have. And then we can take our questions at the appropriate time. A short brief about SON is that it was established in 1971 and rightly under the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. Like I said earlier, to provide enabling support for the industry, for trade, and also for investments. And its responsibilities are no other than majorly to coordinate development of standards for products and services, and also by regulation to ensure that all locally manufactured and imported products comply with the requirements of the standards through its conformity assessment activities. As we go along, you begin to understand what we mean by standards and also the conformity assessment activities and how it affects you as a nano, micro, small and medium enterprise. And in every country, there's only one national standards body, and Nigeria is under the Standards Organization of Nigeria. In other words, Standards Organization of Nigeria is the national secretariat for all matters of standardization in Nigeria. And so you find that the SON represents Nigeria in all global standardization bodies, either at the continental level, at the African Organization for Standardization, at the regional level at ECOWAS, or at the international level, where we begin to talk of the International Organization for Standardization, the International Electrotechnical Commission. And so when you begin to talk about whether Nigeria's industrial standards comply with the requirements of international standards, this will give you that assurance that indeed we are well represented. So whatever subject of standardization that is discussed anywhere in the world, SON is on ground to make sure that our national positions are taken care of. This is our vision, our mission, our policy, our objectives, and our core values. And they are all geared towards giving that assurance and commitment on what we do and how we are there to assure that Nigeria's products remain very, very competitive and in line with best practices that are obtainable in the world. As we go into the presentation proper, there is need for us to understand some definitions. We talk about standards, we talk about quality, and it's good to know what these terms actually are. They are terms that we use on a daily basis. Sometimes we use them because it's appropriate to use, but then they also have their technical meanings, which you need to understand, either as a manufacturer, a service provider, or a customer who is patronizing those products. So standards are defined generally as documents that are put together and agreed by stakeholders as a means to achieving the desirable quality for a product or a service. So you begin to see when you are talking about standard is actually a document in itself that contains all those parameters, specifications, or requirements that will help a product or service meet the desire of the person that is patronizing. While quality, on the other hand, you can say is a compliance to those requirements that are already established in the standards. And then most commonly, you can say it is fitness for purpose, because once quality has been established, it means it's going to satisfy either product performance or other qualities that a customer will naturally desire from patronizing a product. And so that is what quality stands for. And so it's only a customer who patronizes your product that can actually establish whether it has met their expectations in order to say that indeed what you have to offer is of good quality. And like I said earlier, quality is the driving force for industry, trade, and investment. Standardization is nothing more than the process that is involved in the application of standards. And then regulations, also you talk about standards, you talk about regulations. It is rules that are meant to control or manage certain activities, and they cannot be changed, and they are mandatory. And so when you align that with what government regulations are, it gives you that meaning, which is authorities that are established or requirements that are established by the government as being mandatory, and you must comply by them as established. Intra-regional trade is much more in the public domain now, all thanks to the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And so you begin to see that it is, when we talk about international, intra-regional trade, we are talking about trade in goods and services that is occurring within the continent and from one country to the other. SON is not operating in isolation. Sometimes people ask me and they want to know who gave us the power for us to do what we are doing. And it is by virtue of the SON Act 2015. And SON is also a key agency that was recognized, or that is recognized in the Nigerian Constitution. So that helps you to underscore how important the role of SON is in Nigeria. We do a lot of work, which some of us here may be conversant with or not. But this presentation is now aimed to help you understand whether and how and why you need to partner with SON if your product must receive that acceptability. And then apart from the mandate, which is earlier outlined to develop standards, ensure compliance, it is also to ensure that lives and property within the Nigerian territory, whether incoming, outgoing, are also protected in order to give us integrity. As we progress, you begin to see all this. I did say about consumer satisfaction. It also provides value for your money because you're going to be eliminating undue waste, either in your production process or in your pricing or patronage by the customer. Competitiveness is also a key terminology that is coming with the issues of trade. And so if a country must trade very well, products to be competitive on the same level, then standard is the way to go. His Excellency, the Ambassador Yonov Aga, did talk about the issues of standards key to improving trade. So it is a good tool to ensure that our local and foreign earnings are well escalated and sustainable. When we talk about made in Nigeria products, meeting standards, then we will also understand how standards will help you to facilitate access to local markets, regional markets, continental markets, and international markets. And that is what the next presentation will talk about. I've already defined what standards is, and what we have on the screen is a detailed component of the actual definition. This should interest you. You know, I did say that standard is a document. This is how it actually looks. And depending on the content, it comes in different pages. So what we have on the screen is a typical standard. And if we go to the table of content, it will help you to understand what you will typically find inside a standard, and they all come in these generic headings. And it is within this document that you begin to specify the requirements and in details, which now describes what either a service should have or a product characteristics in order for it to meet your quality requirement. Standards comes in different types. You have the product standards. This has to do with your products. There are system service standards. There are codes of practices, which helps you, gives guideline on how you should carry out an activity in order for you to be able to attain quality. You have also safety standards. It's the terms are quite straightforward and I won't dwell on them. And so you also have test methods and also terminology standards that gives you terms and definitions for you to properly understand certain technical terms. This page on the screen is particularly interesting in the sense that it speaks to what you do as an entrepreneur. And so you see that contrary to some understanding out there, you find that we directly execute standards in every facet of what we do. So if you are in whatever it is that you do, the moment you have established rules that you expect certain persons to comply with, then automatically you have established standards. And so if you are a producer or you're a service provider, those guidelines that you have established to help your company run on a daily basis, procedures, and all of that, it is the company standards, and we recognize them because eventually those are what falls and are collapsed along the chain of company standards, trade group standards, national standards, regional, continental, intercontinental. So you find that along the chain of standards development, this is the sequence. So it starts from your individual standards, and then we begin to recognize your trade group standards. For example, you have some committees you belong to, trade associations, you can come together and agree on certain standards that will guide your operations so that that competitiveness will be established. And then your groups, your associations can set themselves as apart and distinguish their services or their products as quality complying groups. And so all these, the company and trade groups are eventually what is collapsed to have the national standards, which we call the Nigeria Industrial Standards. And this is because when you have a national standard, you actually want to create sanity in the system. You don't want everybody to have diverse standards running around the whole place. Mr. A having his standard, Mr. B a different standard, Mr. C a different standard, and that means chaos. So what the SON now does is to harmonize all of these standards into one common standard known as the Nigeria Industrial Standard. And so you find that only one standard will now operate as a national standard for reference and for compliance. And the national standard is what is taken into consideration when you begin to have regional standard, like at the ECOSTAN, Nigeria is well represented in the ECOWAS Standards Development Committee. And so what we take there is a national position. We also have the continental standards. We have in the House the Secretary General of the African Continental Africa Organization for Standardization, which is responsible for the coordination of standards harmonization in Africa. And so SON is also there to ensure that Nigeria's position is well represented and also complied with, because once those standards come, we automatically adopt them to become the Nigerian industrial standards, to also serve that purpose of creating harmony within the system, so that when we now begin to trade, we'll be trading with one standard, as you will get to understand when we progress to why we need to be involved in standards development for us to be able to trade competitively under the African Continental Free Trade Area. And so from there also, it progresses to the international standard. So you find that all the way standards is there. The standards development process is very simple. It is very involving, because to start with, the Standards Organization of Nigeria is not actually responsible for standards development, in contrast to what opinion that we have out there. So when you begin to say some did not develop standards, you're actually speaking to yourselves, either as producers, as customers, or as service providers, because it is your responsibility to develop standards based on what you feel is best for the market. And so when we are developing the process, we establish the process for you and put you through the established procedures that are in line with best practices for a standards to be developed. And so it is very, very engaging. It is transparent. It is coherent. Everybody, you have to understand it. It is transparent for everybody to participate in. And so there's a data collection stage, in-house committee review, collation and harmonization with stakeholders, comment. That means for every process that is being done in the standard development, the stakeholders are carried along. And then when it has been established that yes, there were stakeholders' involvement, the Standard Council of Nigeria will approve. And then there are procedures for also assessing or identifying standards to be developed. And it is through market needs surveys. You go to the market, you find out what's happening in the market, what new products are there. You find out what technical innovations are coming up. Like, you know, in the past, there were nothing like the GSM, there were no Android phones. A necessity suddenly came up, and we began to see the need to develop standards for these products and in order to monitor their quality. And also government policy. You remember sometimes when government came out with a cassava policy. Once those government policies are issued, automatically the need for standards development will be established. And then the members, mandatory members of standards development committee, which we call the technical committees, are the academia, the manufacturers, research institutions, the consumers, exporters, and other stakeholders who have interest in those standards to be developed. So it is at this stage that it is very important for you to understand why you need to lend your voice to standards development. Otherwise, when you don't do that, it can be likened to the situation of someone's hair being barbed on behind his back, like we say in Nigeria. Because once the standard has been developed, you have no choice than to comply with it within the scope of the regulatory framework that SON is implementing as approved by the government under the mandatory conformity assessment. So you find that in some countries, generally it is said that standards are voluntary, but because of our peculiarity, standards compliance is mandatory. And that's why you have the mandatory conformity assessment program, which is the certification arm of the work that we do. And you begin to see it as we progress. I've already, in the initial presentation, highlighted what standards does. And from the screen, you will see it. At the end of the day, what we are seeing dovetails into economic development and business growth. This also is a continuation of what standards will do for you when you apply it in your operations. It's still continuing, just too numerous to list. Now, these are the products that SON has to be able to serve you better, to cover all the scope of your activity. So if you are requiring certifications, we offer it for imported products under the SON Conformity Assessment Program, the SONCAP. For those who are importing, this is the service that is applicable for us to know what you are bringing in order for us to monitor the quality. I've talked about the mandatory conformity assessment program. We also have the management system certification, which is for service, and we'll see it as we progress. We also have product registration, which is a scheme to have all the data of all the products that are produced in Nigeria. And of course, our standardization activities have dwelt so much on standards development because that is the backbone of the work that we do. And we have our library services where we sell those standards because they are not for free. You know, anything given for free has no value. So there is a fee that is charged for the standards for sustainability. And it is in the custody of our library service. They are the custodian of all the of all the standards that we have. Then for services, we have our sound testing services, our laboratories that are in Lagos, Enugu, Kaduna, and we're also extending those services to having regional laboratories for specific products based on the primary products in those areas. Port operations covers the scope of our activities regarding imports and exports. And then we have training, we carry out training on all matters of standardization. Metrology is the science of measurement. We use metrology to ensure that all measurements are accurate. And so we have our National Metrology Institute in Enugu. So when you want to calibrate your scale, instead of using your fingers and to swing the dials and the arm of those measurements with a view to trying to reset your scale, that is a wrong approach. It is the Metrology Institute that has that responsibility to help you calibrate your equipment so that you don't waste and you don't shortchange your customers. The some building blocks for intra-regional trade under the ECOWAS Trade Liberation Scheme and the African Continental Free Trade Area, and other types of trades that are going to be established now or in future. And of course, there are all the services that I've already detailed earlier. And all these are aimed to improve your product quality to ensure that they meet not just the target market requirements, but most importantly, customer satisfaction.
Madam, are you going to please round up now?
And so the area I'm focusing on is on this African Continental Free Trade Area. The DG of the National Office of Trade Negotiation highlighted how standards are very important to trade. And this page on the screen is underscoring that issues of standards and regulations have already been captured under the trade agreement. And so compliance is very, very required. And these are the services we offer: the product service, product certification with our mark of quality under the mandatory conformity assessment program. I already said this program is what confirms your compliance to standards. It continues. We have them in different types, which I highlighted earlier. I won't dwell on it. And these are our marks of quality. You can see the markup with the bird and the sun cap and the other marks of quality that are evidence of your compliance to standards. I've talked about the National Metrology Institute. This is very key support for MSMEs development. What are we doing with MSMEs? The establishment of the MSMEs desk, which I heard, is important because we wanted to create a window of opportunity for us to interface with the MSMEs, to understand their needs in order for us to be able to serve them better. And what do? We encourage and promote their inclusion in the technical committees on standards development, which I highlighted earlier. And to encourage compliance, we have done as much as possible to subsidize our service charges. And it is presented on the screen. For lack of time, I can only solicit that the MSMEs who are here now need to contact us for us to discuss better, because the issues of standards compliance cannot be exhausted through this presentation alone. And so I encourage us to use this opportunity to reach out to us. You can see on the screen most of the challenges that we are trying to tackle with to sensitize the interests of the MSMEs in standards development in Nigeria. Ease of doing business, we are there to serve you better. Currently, we have done 6,789 products with certifications by 3,563 MSMEs. And my question is, are you amongst this number? So going forward, I want to celebrate your inclusion in this number to help us raise this number for us to be able to take the opportunities provided by the African Continental Free Trade Area by storm. I always want to share this page because it's important. In the past, as a young officer, I always knew that SON was seen as a policing organization. On the contrary, it is a business facilitator and an enabler. It is a partner in your business development. And so if you want to manufacture, you want to be successful in trade, you want to promote investment, the person to talk to, the organization to talk to is Standards Organization of Nigeria. And we are everywhere currently. We have 9 regional directories that have been created now in order for you also to get closer to the grassroots. We have 43 state offices. So you find that most states now have 2-3 offices, and all these are aimed to get close to you so that you can reach out to us. Like I said earlier, be involved in standards development, be involved in the work that we do, make policy part of your company procedures, establish quality as part of the policy that you are making, objectives, let quality form part of it, and you will see that your business will be working and generating that profit that you so much desire. So the toll-free lines where you can reach us is there. And we have our customer complaints and feedback. So if you are a client, if you're a manufacturer, you also have clients who are your customers. Either they are your suppliers or they patronize you, or you're a consumer, you also have people who service you. All of these, if you have problem with quality, then you can call this number.
Thank you
We
very
have
much.
also lots of media that we try to reach out in terms of advocacies. All these are on the screen for you to see.
Thank you.
And my telephone number is there on the screen for you to contact me if the need arises. I look forward to seeing you. I'm sorry for taking your time, but this is the story of standards.
Thank you very much, Mrs.
Thank you very
Arumemi.
much.
Thank you so
Thank
very
you all
much.
for listening.
There was no way I was going to interrupt or stop you, because you are the reason that we're here. And I'm sure that the audience has listened attentively to you, but I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Not only is this webinar being recorded and will be sent, links will be sent to all participants, there's always also an opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A box, which is on your screens. Please patronize the Q&A box. We're going to try and take all those questions, but if for any reason we cannot take your question, please specify which of the panelists you would like to pay attention to you, so that they can do it offline after this program. Thank you again once more, Mrs. Arumemi, and please give our regards to the Director General. Very quickly, because time is not on our side, I'm going to move on to call our next panelist. And he's a man with an extensive background in international trade, having served on 3 spectrums. Mr. Rambod Behboodi is an experienced national trade law expert and policy advisor. And I do know personally that he has advised over 15 governments on their trade affairs, principally having worked as a trade advisor to the government of Canada. He's a lawyer like me, and he only recently retired from active legal practice to face consulting in international trade. It is therefore my greatest pleasure to invite Mr. Rambod Behboodi to speak to his topic, which will cover the tips that he wishes to give to traders. So if we are listening to standards before, we're now going to listen to tips. Rambod, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sergi, for that great introduction. Just one note: I haven't retired from practice. I've expanded my legal practice to include
My
policy
apologies.
advice. No, that's okay. I'm just a little bit too young to to retire still. Okay, well, look, we heard a great deal of really good information from the Standards Organization of Nigeria. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a bit outside of the technicalities of Nigeria and talk to you a little bit about the global scene for standards, technical regulations, and SPS measures. I'll explain what they are, and also what that means in the context of African free trade, the African free trade zone, and about what it means for you. Just let me say, begin with one very simple thing, which Ms. Arumemi mentioned, and it is the importance for all companies to make sure that policy is an aspect of the work that you do. And I'll explain why, but this coming from your standard making organization, it really was music to my ears, because it's one of the areas where everyone thinks, all the businesses think, we can just ignore this because we're in the business of making money, and policy, as we will see, is part of the business of making money. Okay, so I'm going to share with you my presentation, and let's see. Yes, I seem to be sharing this, and there we are. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is non-tariff measures in African export trade. And I mention export trade because that is one of the key drivers of development. But bearing in mind that in today's supply chain economy, exports and imports are inextricably linked. And so when I talk about export trade, this is not just a mercantilist spiel. It's about both exports and imports. It's about domestic development. It's about the domestic economy. So that's what I do, both trade law and policy. So we heard Mrs. Aramemi talk about standards, but there is the world of technical regulations, technical barriers to trade, non-tariff barriers to trade, as Ambassador Aga mentioned, is broader than that. And these are standards, technical regulations, and SPS measures. And I'll explain a little bit about them, because the way we approach each is different, and the way they have an impact on your international trade performance is also different. Okay, so standards. We heard a lot about how standards are developed in Nigeria, and so I think the basic outline of the international definition should be fairly clear. They're documents approved by a recognized body. In Nigeria, it's the SON, but also we saw, for example, internationally, we have the International Standards Organization, that's the ISO. In the European Union, the CEN is one such body, the Centre Européen de Normalisation, and then each country, each member of the EU has its own. Standard making organizations can be official, like the SON or the CEN, or officially governmental, or they can be non-governmental organizations. For example, the Underwriters Laboratory and the Canadian Standards Association. I mean, these are both standards making and also standards and also standards conformity organizations. But you can have both public and private standards making bodies. These are rules, guidelines, or characteristics for products for common and repeated use. Now, here's the key point to remember. When in international trade circles, we talk about standards, we're talking about those measures that are not mandatory, okay? The best example of this right now is when we talk about USB-C, for example, as a way to charge or connect your devices. No government in the world requires that USB-C be shaped the way it is and be sold the way it is, and that this product use a USB-C and that product use something else. This is an industry-driven standard. It works well because it allows interchangeability, et cetera, and so you have basically a privately developed standard, advanced and used by private industry for the betterment of both their performance and also consumer experience. This is an example of a standard, and then it can be about any number of other things. It's not just about the way the product is shaped or manufactured or used. It could be about terminology, symbols, packaging, and marking, and so on. Now, technical regulations are all of the above, but in instances where the compliance is mandatory. And we see these instances where, for example, a product is sensitive. You have a lot of medical device regulations that specify exactly what the particular product should do and what the outcomes must be and what the technical requirements are. And because these are sensitive, they're part of in most countries, they are mandated rather than privately enforced and adopted. In the AFCFTA, TBTs, technical barriers to trade, are dealt with under Annex 6. And I think it's really important. I've highlighted some issues that we're going to have to talk about in greater detail when there's time. Conformity assessment is going to be one of the major issues that we're going to be coming back to again and again. Now, in the AFCA, in the context of the AFCFTA, the objective is to facilitate trade. And then you see a list of ways in which trade can be facilitated through TBT measures. One of them, of course, is harmonization of standards. And this is what Ambassador Aga was talking about when he was talking about having a Pan-African approach to standardization. But this can be in respect of any number of not just standards, but also technical regulations. You see some of the basic principles. For example, enhancing transparency in the development of these measures. And this is again reflected in what Mrs. Aramemi was talking about when she was talking about the input that that private sector has in making Nigerian standards. Of course, without transparency, you're not going to have that input. Now, the bigger your ambit, so if you try to go outside of Nigeria and have a Pan-African approach to either standard making or regulation making, obviously your transparency requirements are going to be bigger. At that point, it's not just enough to have local input, but it becomes important to have continental input. I'll have something to say about promoting African development and implementation of standards. I think it's a great principle to start with in order to integrate Pan-African, the African economies. At the same time, what we need to make sure is that the compatibility of those standards with international standards, to the extent, and we will see this in just a second, to the extent that we're talking about exports outside of the continent. So as Soji mentioned in his introduction, standardization is not just about consumer protection. It is an economic imperative if you want economic integration, if you want to reduce, if you want to increase economies of scale and so on. But we also need to be aware that whatever is produced in Africa, if you want to export it outside of Africa, then the standards and technical regulations of the continent need to be compatible internationally. And again, we see the last line in Annex 6 referring to conformity assessment, and we'll get to that in a second. Now, SPS measures, these are sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And this is basically food and feedstuff health matters. And they're very broad. It covers not just stuff that you find in food that then you might ingest, or in feed that is given to animals, but also the way a product could come and have an impact on the environment. I mean, one of the big disputes, for example, between North America and Europe was over certain types of genetically modified canola. Now, canola in itself is, of course, a great product, right? You make canola oil out of it and so on. But that product, when it gets into areas where it shouldn't be, for example, in vineyards, it becomes a pest. Okay, so SPS measures cover not just products that are in themselves problematic, but products that in context could become problematic. And in fact, we see the importance of SPS measures and the way they have an impact on trade in the latest trade dispute that is launched by South Africa against the European communities. It is in respect of certain measures by the EU that South Africa alleges are not properly devised as SPS measures because they're not based on a scientific risk assessment and so on, but that constitute an unjustified barrier to South Africa's trade. So you see the importance of paying attention to SPS measures because they have a direct impact on terms of trade. In the AFCFTA, Annex 7 of the protocol to trading goods covers SPS measures. Of course, an important aspect of harmonization of SPS measures is boosting intra-African trade. That's very commendable. At the same time, I think there's a recognition that talking about Pan-African SPS measures is not always sound, because what you need to look at is areas, regions where the pest and disease profile is similar. If you have different pest and disease profiles in different regions of Africa, having a sort of a automatic pan-continental harmonization may well detract from the protection of biodiversity in the regions, protection of animal, plant life, and health. So this is this aspect of SPS measures that should always be taken into account. On the one hand, they could be a barrier to trade. It's good to have a broad agreement on the measures. On the other hand, you have to make sure that agreement on the measures does not end up having a negative impact on your agriculture, on your animals, on the local health population. So along the way, we've talked about the benefits of non-tariff measures. So quality was one, product quality was one thing identified by Mrs. Aramemi of the SON. Soji talked about economies of scale. So we're broadly speaking, when we talk about standards, when we talk about technical regulations, when we talk about SPS measures, we're talking about, number one, consumer protection. Number two, ensuring a sound economic basis for development. And number three, obviously protecting the environment in a broader sense. On the whole, a lot of measures that are characterized as technical barriers, they help integrate and improve industrial quality and effectiveness and efficiency. So that's a good thing. And of course, SPS measures, as I just said, they're essential for protecting not just the local population, but as I will mention in just a second, for ensuring that your exports are competitive. Because if you have products that don't meet the SPS requirements of your export markets, you won't be able to export them. What are the drawbacks? The drawbacks is, as once a standard maker, a standard official told me, if I change X from feet to metric, or from metric to feet, from metric to imperial, I can basically stop or hinder or advance different products from different countries. It's as simple as that. So standards, technical regulations, and as we see SPS measures, as we see in the South African case, can be used for either for protectionist reasons or allegedly protectionist reasons. Misconceived non-tariff barriers can be deeply harmful to international trade. And of course, if you have the wrong SPS framework, that could both hinder your exports and also potentially affect life-saving imports. We've heard about baby formula in the US. That's one the shortages that happened in the US. That's one way where you have SPS measures that end up having a direct impact on domestic policy. Okay, so now we start from the top in terms of tips, what to do. Well, there are different ways of reducing trade friction in NTMs. In the EU, you have supranational rulemaking by the European Union and its various organizations, and then there are different mechanisms in different free trade agreements or different ways of addressing the same problems. You can have bilateral harmonization or convergence. You can have mutual recognition of the rules. You can have mutual recognition of conformity assessment. And let me just say a brief word about this, because this has come up and this will come up. Conformity assessment, depending on the sensitivity of the sector, is going to be very difficult. Mutual recognition, that is, of conformity assessment. That is for different countries to mutually recognize each other's conformity assessment procedures, because you need to have a great deal of confidence, not only in the labs that do the conformity assessment, but in the government that does the inspection, in the entire legal framework that allows the conformity assessment to be validated and to be enforced. This does not mean you don't get into mutual recognition agreements. It just means that putting together a mutual recognition agreement is, and I've negotiated a mutual recognition agreement, I've helped implement them. Putting together a mutual recognition agreement is a laborious exercise. It may well be better to have continent-wide frameworks, or at least regional frameworks, where there are centers to do the auditing and to do the verification of the mutual recognition, rather than of the conformity assessment bodies, rather than mutual recognition, which, as I said, requires a great deal of confidence and a great deal of work. And then we've heard a lot about this in the context of Brexit, about equivalence. Equivalence is fundamentally a political decision, and so it may not necessarily be the best way to approach in the context of continental trade. The kind of institutions you need, again, it depends on the degree of integration that you expect out of a regional or a continental framework. There's no question in my mind that if you have a continental framework, it needs to have appropriate legislative and dispute resolution frameworks, which is going to make it very difficult and potentially cumbersome. You could have ongoing bilateral negotiations, which again create additional costs for each country's. Whichever way you do it, it requires a great deal of confidence building, and it requires ongoing institutional assessment, verification, and strengthening. And all the while bearing in mind that when we talk about integration, we're talking about a deepening of economic relations. It has its positive side, but it also has the other side, that the more you deepen your economic relations, the more you integrate, the less control you have over, or national control you have over the outcomes. And this is true whenever we talk about dispute resolution as well. Okay. Now, in closing, let me touch upon three particular issues that you need to take into account as you move forward. Now, first one is certain types of non-tariff measures, and especially SPS measures, are extremely sensitive. So I think it's fair to say that even though a lot of LDCs and less developed countries and developing countries have tariff-free access to many developed country markets, their exports are continue to be subject to regulatory measures. And there is no way, it is absolutely not going to happen for an exception to be granted in respect of, for example, SPS measures, because these are health matters, and rightly or wrongly, they are very politically sensitive. As I talked about, as I mentioned, a Pan-African approach to standards, regulations, or SPS measures is going to be useful and interesting, but it will have considerable costs and it will take a long time. And of course, the flip side of that is the policy complexity of every stage, whether we talk about standard development, which we saw in the SON's very elaborate and informative presentation, setting up systems for standards development, for conformity assessment, for SPS, development of SPS measures and enforcement is going to be outside the capacity of national capacity of most African states. So there is a between systemic considerations and policy complexity, you see that there is necessarily a bit of a tension. I'm half a minute over. I'm just gonna do my last slide here. So what's the path forward? I think what we need is national capacity building for African countries and African businesses, but capacity building at a policy level. That is to say, capacity to understand the issues and to develop measures. Then we need continent-wide cooperation in institutional and substantive terms. And finally, we of course need to pay attention to structural issues in global trade, which is to say that you can build up intra-African trade as much as you like, but if you want to deal with Europe, if you want to deal with the US, if you want to sell to developed markets, you have to bear in mind that there is a broader structure. That broader structure is the WTO agreement, and we need to operate within that. Now, South Africa is benefiting from that. It's high time that the rest of the continent also integrated itself into that global structure. On that, with apologies for going over, I'm gonna end the presentation.
Rambod, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to listen to you on virtually any subject in international trade nowadays. You've seen it all, and thank you for not sparing us the hard elements of the journey into standards and MRAs and stuff like that. I did not for any minute want to rob you of a potentially rich clientele in Africa by saying you are no longer practicing law. I know that you do more policy than law nowadays, but that's neither here nor there. Thank you very much for covering those issues so astutely. Again, I'm asking our audience to please note their questions because that really is the flip of all that is being delivered by these panelists. Your interrogation of what they are saying, your understanding of what they are getting across is as vital as what they are trying to get across. Thank you very much. Let us move on and let's listen to Rebecca Ebokpo, who is a senior associate with the law firm of AELEX, who will talk to us about mutual recognition agreements under the AFCFTA. Let me presage Rebecca's speech by saying that we've had warm news from Nairobi this morning that even though there are none sitting on statute books or Hansards just right now, there is in fact a very vigorous move to get mutual recognition agreements going in the African setting. Now, the problems that will come from it, we have been warned by Rambod. So let us hear Rebecca as she approaches the subject. Perhaps she will tell us there's nothing to worry about. Rebecca Ebokpo, a senior associate at AELEX, please present.
Thank you very much, sir, for the introduction. And thank you to the other speakers that had spoken earlier than me. I think they have helped to lay the proper foundation for what I'll be talking about this afternoon. It's like the flip side of standards. I'll be speaking about mutual recognition agreements, specifically to the AFCFTA agreement. So I'd like to save our time and take it as quickly as possible so we can give more time for questions and answers. What are mutual recognition agreements? basically, there are international agreements by which 2 or more countries agree to recognize one another's conformity assessments. Already, the other speakers have helped to elaborate clearly on what conformity assessments happen to be. What mutual recognition agreement seeks to achieve is a situation where the decisions or the results of certification and test results of one country is recognized by another country to enable trade across borders. So mutual recognition agreements are based on those kind of agreements on recognition. MRAs also reflects a conscious choice of governments to engage in regulatory changes and solely focusing on reducing transaction costs of market access in case of relatively more regulated products. Most times, the regulations for different products differ across various countries. And when you have the disparity in regulation, certification procedures, standards, and what have you, it's going to be difficult for those essentially constitute barriers to trade. So they don't enable market access. So one of the ways to enable market access is to ensure a situation where countries can recognize the conformity assessment, standards, and regulations of each other in enabling trade. But where do these mutual recognition agreements evolve from? Basically, they evolve from the concepts, which is wider, mutual recognition. I recognize what you do, you recognize what I do. We all agree that these standards apply in different places, but I will recognize yours and you recognize mine. So mutual recognition implies that the goods or services produced under a different regulatory landscape in country A can enjoy unhindered market access in country B. Definitely, these countries have different laws, but the agreements tend to align them to ensure that both products that emanate from different regulatory landscapes can enter into each other's markets, and that we can enable trade. Also, when there is uniformity in safety, health, environment, and consumers' requirements, and those requirements will not impede market access any longer. But when the requirements differ, then mutual recognition may help address the trade frictions that occur as a result of such differences. Now, under the AFCFTA, one of the ways in which technical barriers to trade can be eliminated is the encouragement of mutual recognition agreements. And I'll briefly go through some of the provisions in the agreement where mutual recognition of standards and conformity assessments are important for trade to be liberalized in the continent. So I'll start with the protocol on trade in services. For the purpose of this discussion, I just want to go alongside the services first, and then I'll come back to the goods. So for the protocol on trade in services, Article 10, paragraph 1, provides for a standardized criteria for the authorization, licensing, certification, service suppliers under the agreement. What this means is that there is going to be uniformity in licensing, in certification. Those things are going to be harmonized in such a manner that will make it easy for one country to recognize the licensing and the certification from one country into another country. So this protocol also provides for the recognition of educational experiences, education experience and the requirements met, licenses or certifications granted in one state parties by another state party. So if you happen to have studied medicine in Nigeria, the medical bodies or responsible institutions in Ghana should be able to recognize your license as a medical practitioner in Nigeria. And the whole idea is to ensure that you would also be able to perform such medical service also in Ghana. I'm giving an example now. But such recognition can only be attained through harmonization. This comes often ways by way of bilateral agreements or arrangements, or autonomously. Sometimes countries on their own have within their own local laws what they'll consider as the criteria of their own professional practices and licenses from other countries. Have other countries met this, criteria, they will be able to autonomously confer understanding or recognition to the standards or certifications issued by other state parties under the AFCFTA. Article 10 sub 2 also provides that state parties are to afford adequate opportunities to other interested state parties to negotiate their accessions to such agreements. So even when you have existing agreements, maybe at regional levels or bilateral levels, state parties are to allow other state parties to also accede to such agreements, just to enable trade and to enable the development of mutual recognition agreements, which Mr. Rambod Behboodi has already explained is quite a difficult task to attain. Again, in the Protocol for Trade in Services, Article 10 sub 3 also provides that state parties are not to accord recognition in a manner that will constitute a means of discrimination between state parties on the application of its standards. So already under the AFCFTA, we know what the intention of the agreement is: to liberalize trade in goods, in services, in movement of persons, and to eliminate any form of barrier to trade, which sometimes comes by way of discrimination. And sometimes what may amount to discrimination now happens to be existing regional agreements among, various regions or Francophone countries, Anglophone countries, and how they've already attained a level of, better harmonizations among themselves. But now on the continental scale, they should admit other people into those kinds of accord to enable and ensure that trade is liberalized as much as possible. For Article 10, paragraph 4 as well prescribes that once an agreement, a mutual recognition agreement is reached, within a 12-month period from the date the agreement is reached, the state parties to such agreements are to inform the secretariats that such agreement exists among themselves. Article 10, paragraph 5 also provides that mutual recognition agreements are to be based on the agreed criteria of the AFCFTA. So state parties are enjoined to cooperate together and ensure that they develop and adopt criteria for recognition among themselves. They should adopt common standards and practice of relevant service trade. Definitely, I would be speaking more on how to achieve this feat, because as rightly mentioned by Mr. Behboodi, you see that there already exist different kinds of local legislations, regional agreements that have progressed earlier before the AFCFTA came to be. And some of these agreements already have amongst themselves, standards and MRAs that have already been reached. And now they're opening up this landscape to other state parties under the AFCFTA. So there's a lot of work that would need to be done to harmonize, the standards in this regard. Now for trading goods, one of the key objectives of the protocol is to liberalize the market for trading goods through cooperation in areas of technical barriers to trade, and especially the SPS measures, which Mr. Behboodi has spoken so elaborately on. The annex to the protocol on trading goods further promotes, mutual recognition agreements to achieve the objectives of the protocols, and this is how it puts it. In Article 13, paragraph 7 of Annex 4, this particular annex deals with trade facilitation. The provision is that in order to enhance trade facilitation measures provided to operators, state parties shall afford other state parties the opportunity of negotiating mutual recognition of authorized operator schemes. These authorized operator schemes comprises of, the specific criteria which state parties apply in their customs and security procedures, the SPS measures involved, the record keeping compliance systems, the customs clearance systems, and the whole gamut of trade enablement and customs procedure, basically. This also has to do with the necessary internal controls for financial solvency and the supply chain security. So state parties are supposed to, under the AFCFTA, ensure that they're able to negotiate on these issues and arrive at a mutual recognition of the authorized operator scheme, because this is the best way, or the way that the agreement envisages that we will be able to harmonize and ensure a liberalized trade in goods. Also, Article 4F of the Annex 6, which is on technical barriers to trade, also provides that one of the objectives of the Annex is to promote mutual recognition of results of conformity assessment. So within each state parties, there are organizations like what the SON has spoken to this morning that deal with conformity assessments, setting the criteria for goods and services to meet in order for them to be able to trade across the border. But the AFCFTA agreement is encouraging or anticipating that state parties will be able to mutually agree on the conformity assessment, so that when goods cross the border, they automatically meet the criteria set by the other state parties. And that's the whole essence of eliminating the technical barriers to trade. Now, how are MRAs negotiated? And this is very important because, Mr. Behboodi has stated that it's quite a difficult task to achieve under a continental framework like the AFCFTA. But it's important for us to know how these MRAs are negotiated, because that's how we get to understand the role that stakeholders play in the process. Of course, the AFCFTA agreement is between state parties. It's not the kind of agreement that individuals or traders are directly, responsible for negotiating. But the state parties are the umbrellas under which the umbrellas that cover the traders in the African continental trade. So you'll be wondering, am I being properly represented? Are the policies in negotiations, are they going to favor my business? Those kind of considerations or thoughts often come through the minds of traders, and they begin to wonder, okay, what role do I play in this whole process? So I just want to speak briefly on how these things work in terms of negotiation. So MRAs are negotiated under trade agreements. Sometimes it could be bilateral between two state parties. It could be multilaterals where you have many other state parties involved. And of course, we have regional agreements already in force where they've recognized each other's standards and conformity assessments. And the AFCFTA readily is a hands-on example on how the MRAs can be negotiated at a continental basis too. But these are the kind of instruments that give rise to MRAs, because in terms of ensuring that trade across border is made as easy as possible, all state parties would definitely have to give some kind of compromise. So it's not going to be easy, like Mr. Behboodi said, but it's going to require some kind of compromise. It will require a lot of give and take. And of course, we have our negotiating bodies. I think the NOTN was here, and it's good to know that, for people to know that they are well represented in this forum where negotiations are taking place. So we have the preliminary proposal for an MRA. Of course, when the need arises for harmonization to occur to enable trade, there will be proposals for a mutual recognition agreement specific to a sector, a good, or a service. And when such proposals come up, the first thing that countries want to see is, what are the impact assessments of the MRAs that is being proposed? How is it going to affect our economy? How is it going to affect our traders? How is it going to enable our economy to thrive under this arrangement? And when the impact assessment takes place, then you begin to confirm the scope and the objective of the MRA that you are proposing for that particular good or service. Then you get to work on preparing drafts it's a good thing to hear this morning that, of course, there are already template drafts for MRAs across different sectors that the NOTN has already come up with. That's a fantastic news. And of course, going forward, then there'll be deliberations on the working drafts by the working groups that will lead to the development of a draft for member states consultation. And when I talk about consultation, this is the time that stakeholders within each member state will then consult. I did hear Ambassador Aga talk about the consultation part. Say stakeholders are definitely the minds of, you know, the trade policymakers. They want to be sure that whatever decisions they are taking stems from the interest of the stakeholders. So from time to time, you see that these regulatory bodies, negotiating bodies, they come up with policies or MRAs for consideration, and they open it up to stakeholders. They give out exposure drafts, they call for meetings. This is the position or time when stakeholders should actively get involved. The same thing happens with the SON. I did see during the presentation of Mrs. Rumemi that policies and standards don't just go out. I mean, there's sufficient time to engage with stakeholders to ensure that their interests are well captured in this process. And of course, after the consultation process, we then go through the development of a final working group draft, which is then finalized and then approved by all the parties. Subsequently, the implementation phase will then occur, where state parties will then begin to take the initiative to drive the innovations from their own territories. Pardon me, please. What are the benefits of the MRAs? MRAs, I think a couple of the earlier speakers have spoken about how standards and MRAs are beneficial to economies and stakeholders of international trade. The MRAs basically, they reduce the multiple conformity assessments that products and services, systems, processes, and materials have to undergo from different countries. So when you are going to trade a service or a good across the border, you need not bother any longer with what will qualify in that other country, because if you apply a standard that has been harmonized, or you apply a standard that has been adopted under a mutual recognition agreement, automatically you meet the requirements of the target markets that you are trading with. So in a sense, you are reducing the cost of trade. Also, MRAs contributes to the efficiency of international trading system by facilitating the acceptance of goods and services everywhere on the basis of single assessments in one country. So if you have to have a laboratory assessment for your good, for example, once that good passes the assessment of that laboratory, automatically that certification from that laboratory enables it to enter into another market, because the criteria that the laboratory is going to be applying is already a mutually recognized one. So that's the whole essence of MRAs. Also, MRAs enable greater certainty of market access. So you are sure that once you meet the standard, or once you comply with the criteria under this MRA, automatically you meet the criteria of the market that you're assessing. They also increase competition and innovation. I think Mr. Behboodi spoke a lot more about this. And the MRAs foster harmony among trading nations, as well as greater administrative efficiency. Now, I admit and I agree with Mr. Behboodi that it's quite challenging to achieve MRAs under continental frame. And the reasons are not far-fetched. So we have the issue of political economy of cooperation. Already, different state parties, they're going to have to bear on equal distribution of cost and benefits. The way that the AFCFTA works is that definitely some countries will benefit in one area, some other countries may lose in these other areas. So it doesn't mean that once you benefit in this area, you benefit in another area. That's what I mean when I said there'll be quite a number of compromise. But on the whole, the things you lose in the areas that you're not strong for, you should gain them from the areas that you are strong for. But because of these issues, a lot of countries would hesitate and say, oh, how do I commit myself to something that is not 100% win-win for me? They have regulatory landscape that differ across the different state parties. And then they would have to do a lot of restructuring of local legislations to fit into the purpose of such MRAs. So these are some of the challenges on the political economy side. We also have the regulatory specificity as a possible a possible lack of flexibility. So when countries have already progressed so deeply with their internal regulatory systems, adopting anything that would make them to change or significantly complicate what they already have on ground, it's quite difficult, and it makes it difficult to attain rapprochement under the agreement. We also have the issue of reduction of regulatory authority. Then you begin to think that when you adopt MRAs, you are losing your guard, you are giving more freedom to nations to decide and insist on how you should regulate your own local trade regime. So these are some of the challenges. And on the whole, we also have the challenge of implementation. Implementation definitely will require modification of processes, systems, policies that are already in place, and it will take a long time to achieve. And of course, that definitely must have informed Mr. Behboodi's position that it's not difficult to it's quite difficult to achieve MRAs on the continental scale. But like we all know, the AFCFTA is a quite laudable project. It's quite ambitious. We're not going to get there in a day, but it's important for us to know that it is achievable and we can all work together to make it happen. So definitely, there are already existing stakeholder bodies that engender mutual recognition agreements. And the AFCFTA agreement itself recognizes that these institutions would facilitate trade within the continent. And it says that under Article 8D and E of Annex 6 on trade facilitation, what the agreement wants state parties to do is to make use of accredited conformity assessment bodies that are already in place. Those are going to be like the building blocks, the frame, the foundation upon which the MRAs can be negotiated, because some of these accrediting organizations are already looking into things that can easily form the basis of MRAs. So it will be easy to build on the work that they have done over time and see how we can build mutual acceptance of conformity assessment. Some of these organizations are the AFRAC, the ILAC, the IAF. I heard Mrs. Arumemi mention some of them in the course of her presentation. I also listed them out clearly to let us see some of the things that these organizations do. The African Accreditation Corporation, the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, the International Accreditation Forum, the African Standards Organization. Some of the organizations will deal extensively with goods. Some of them will deal extensively with services. But locally speaking, we have quite a number of stakeholder bodies that are, quite responsible for facilitating mutual recognition in services and trade as well. We have the National Agency for Food and Drug Control and Administration. We have the Standards Organization of Nigeria that we've been privileged to listen to this afternoon. We also have the Nigerian Agricultural Quarantine Service. We have various professional organizations. You have the Nigerian Bar Association, the Council of Registered Engineers and Nigerian Society of Engineers. You have the Nigerian Medical Association, name them. There are different professional bodies that exist locally. There are also regional and continental professional bodies. I know that for the legal profession, we have the West African Bar Association, we have the Nigerian Bar Association, we have the African Bar Association. These organizations can actually help in formulating the criteria upon which policies can be developed for sponsorship of mutual recognition agreements, so that across state parties, we can export services along the lines of the different professional bodies that are here listed, and even more. We also have the local agencies and institutions that help in facilitating mutual recognition. I know that for the Ministry of Education, they've worked extensively with the ECOWAS, within the region, and with the African state parties also, to look for ways in which their criteria by which academic credentials can be adjudged. And that way, when you finish your primary school, for example, in Nigeria, you should be able to take it on and continue with your secondary education, maybe in Angola, because automatically the criteria upon which you studied is adjudged as meeting the requirements for continuing your studies in another country. So that's how these things operate under the concept of the AFCFTA. But on the whole, when we achieve these things, it's definitely going to remove the technical barriers to trade. It's going to enable market access, and it's going to engender a situation where stakeholders can also participate in policy making and the framework for building mutual recognition agreements under the AFCFTA. So thank you very much. I hope I didn't take too much time in delivering this presentation. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you very much. You did take a little more time than we allotted you, but you are teaching us how to do a difficult thing simply. Notwithstanding the obstacles, I must remind our audience that the AFCFTA is holding a record in international trade of sorts. It is the fastest ever negotiated continental trade agreement of the entire world. So really and truly, it has trumped many things, but it has learned quite a lot from the very convoluted architecture of trade around the world. Africa needs intra-Africa trade more than it realized until AFCFTA. Now that we have realized it, the building blocks are these standards, these mutual recognition agreements, by which we will deepen and strengthen intra-Africa trade. Now, if we move from that frame, we will know that the biggest masquerade who will reconcile all of the differences, harmonize all of the rough edges, would be the African Organization for Standards, the ASO. And it is, in fact, a privilege for us to have the Secretary General of the African Standard Organization, Mr. Hermogene Nsemigana, to address us this afternoon on what these whole arrangements around nations, around the continent, portends for trade, what it is looking like right now, and what we're to expect in the immediate or near future. It is therefore my privilege to invite Mr. Secretary General himself, Mr. Hermogene, to please address us for what the African platform stands at today. Thank you.
Thank you, Soji, my friend, my brother. I would like actually to start thanking AELEX for inviting me just to talk on this topic and have something to discuss from the panelists. I start actually with what you said. Yeah, it's clear that AFCFTA has a record now. Yeah. The mindset that we had in 90s has changed. Yeah. We need to start thinking positively. We have always been told that Africa is behind. Africa cannot do it. Yeah, we can do it. We can do it because if you look at the provision in the WTO agreement on mutual recognition, actually the countries like Europe has been using the mutual recognition arrangement more than us, the countries that need it most. Yeah, to increase our export, our intra-Africa trade. As we know, COVID has taught us many things. And when the market, the international market, the countries we trade with are closing their borders, what we do is always to look for our neighbor. It's very important that we understand this. This is, for us as Africa, an important step to move forward. Key steps have already also been done. Now we have Africa Quality Policy. We have an Africa Quality Policy that has been actually accepted and approved by our head of state after 30 years, when the Abuja Treaty in 1991 had requested that we should have an African equality policy and a quality assurance system that talk to each other. Now we have it. Our head of state have approved it. We are moving forward. We have the AFCFTA agreement. ARZO is a body that was formed by the African Union in 1977. But what have we done from 1977 to recognize ARZO either at international level or at the African continental level? It's what I was saying. It's a mindset. Do we have experts to do standard? Yes, we do. We have experts. Those experts that went to same schools like our other brothers. And that organization is part of the AFCFTA agreement. The same as other organizations like Rebecca was talking about, AFRAC for accreditation, AFRIMET for metrology, and AFSEC for electrotechnical. When you look at TBT Annex 6, Article 6, you will find the responsibility of ARZO saying, if you don't have international standard, look for African standard developed by ARZO. The main issue here is to look at Africa is a standard taker, not a standard maker. We should change that game, because we look at using international standard, they are developed without Africa on the table. We should change that. We should participate in standard making, not just be standard takers. We can only do that when the benefits of standardization, of the benefit of using the standard is acknowledged at the political level, is acknowledged at the private sector level. We can only do that if we change the narrative on trade. We shouldn't only look for trading with Europe or trading with America. We should be looking also for increasing our intra-Africa trade. Because when Soji, you were in Rwanda or you come to Kenya, do you ask yourself when you are in a restaurant that, oh, is this food coming from where? You know, you just eat it. You eat it because you see your brother next table is also eating it. We need to see this value of talking to each other, increasing trade among ourselves as very important. A third part is the issue of SMEs. That's actually Fabian also talked about. We need to change the way we treat our SMEs. Our SMEs, our national standard body, our regulators should not only play a role as police. We should be helping our SMEs. At the ARZO level, we have what we call maturity model certification. The maturity model certification, I saw one slide from Fabian, is to look at what is on the local market, what is at national market, what is at regional market, let's say ECOWAS, what is at continental market, or going at international level. In a way, let me give a simple example. When you have a butchery, that slaughters 2 goats a day, and in 2 hours, the meat is finished. Do you really require that butchery to have same equipment as what someone trading, taking those goats in Europe requires? No. We should know what is the destination market and develop a system, a supply chain that educates our SMEs on issues of quality. Then have a certification that will make those strugglers SMEs to the value chain, include them in the value chain toward supplying globally. Fourth is to look at the priority sectors. The priority sectors, we have conducted a study at the Africa level, also together with the Economical UNECA, Commission for Africa, on issues of which are areas that we need to have priority for harmonization of standard and conformity assessment. That study can be looked at our website. I will put in the chat, or if some of our members are here, can also put in the chat where to find that study. It's a study that gives us around 15 big sector for Africa. That's generated actually 84 technical committees of priority. Among those 84 technical committees, you wouldn't be surprised that 27 technical committees are on agriculture sector, food and agriculture sector, which is a very important sector for Africa. But we shouldn't also ignore that we are in industrialization. We should bring the quality culture in other sectors. It's not about only agriculture. We are dealing also with standard on pharmaceuticals. We are dealing on standard on automotive. That's also come the other area that we didn't talk about on mutual recognition, which is homologation on the cars. We are also dealing with the fourth industrial revolution. We have a strategy for standardization, strategy for the fourth industrial revolution. We should be part of the progress that the global market is demanding. We shouldn't just stick on the well-traded product. We should also look at the potential export basket. When we did that study, we find out that Africa has more than 1,400 new products that we can export between ourselves, and export also elsewhere. Those are the new products. But we are driven by what the West is demanding. We should also see on our market, how can we develop the new product? Those 1,400 new products, how can we put them in our industrialization process? The other part that would like to comment on is institution arrangement. The institution arrangement is key. I even saw some question that you find out that a standard body is in conflict with a regulatory body. They don't talk to each other. And Rambod was presenting on technical regulation and standard. We know standards are voluntary, but in some cases, like the case of Nigeria, standards are mandatory. Knowing your environment, it's very important to know your environment to protect your people, as it's even WTO accept that standards are there for safety, environment, and trade. But we need to work together. The National Standard Bureau should work well with the regulators if we need to move forward with this, what we are discussing, either implementation of standard or mutual recognition arrangement. As you mentioned when you started, currently we have an initiative. It's led by 6 countries. We have Ghana and Nigeria in ECOWAS, Kenya and Rwanda in East Africa, South Africa and Zimbabwe on mutual recognition arrangement. They are discussing those steps that Rebecca has shown. They are discussing a document that they would agree on. They have shared the list of the products that they want to move forward with. And I think this is a very important step. Is an open. I am looking forward one day to see those countries signing that document. Is an open, and it has even a provision of other countries joining the initiative in that document. But most importantly is the point that Rebecca has raised on the issue of stakeholders engagement. That will be very important because we need more stakeholders engagement on that document to move forward. And lastly, Soji is no, the Made in Africa. I saw Made in Nigeria. At the African level, we have developed a Made in Africa criteria. That's Made in Africa criteria, we think it's a game changer. It's a game changer for our SMEs to be able to enter the market, to increase their export throughout Africa. It has three components. It has a component of quality. Yeah. Do you conform to the standard, either international standard or horizontal standard? Second, it has intellectual property, right? Do we need to protect our IPR as Africa? It's very important. Third, it has a component of rules of origin. It has the provision of whichever rules of origin that will be concluded under the AFCFTA are the one to be applicable when you are giving a Made in Africa mark. Those are the big initiatives that we have on the continent that I feel are very important. And I will conclude saying that we need this mutual recognition. I always say it's a 1-1-1 principle. We need one standard, one test, one certificate accepted everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. I like that 1-1-1. What our experts have been telling us is that we should manage our expectations about how quickly we can achieve 1-1-1. But again, if the record of the AFCFTA accession and ratification is anything to go by, that barometer for 1-1-1 will rise very quickly. Thank you very much for your participation, sir. We really value the continental picture that you have given. Ladies and gentlemen, on this webinar, we have been running for close to 2 hours now, and it is just difficult to stop this horse from running. And therefore, I'm going to give you a chance to actually feedback into this webinar by launching the polling of the issues that have come up so far. So I'm going to ask the deck to load the first poll, which will be a poll which gauges level of awareness of standards and AFCFTA in general. I think it's on now. Poll 1 is on. What is the greatest challenge to complying with standards in Nigeria? In order to participate in export trade, which of these areas will government? So please start voting now. Beck, are we getting participation on the polling? I'm told that that is going on smoothly. We're going to give 1 more minute because the boxes are quite a few for people to think very quickly, and let us see how we're getting. If that is done, can we move on to poll number 2, please? Poll number 2, please. This poll is addressing the participation in standards and standard setting and appreciation of the tools and MRAs and AFCFTA, if people understand what use cases of these institutions are. Poll number 2 is up now. The 3-question poll. If that is done, can we move on to poll number 3? Time is not exactly on our side. We had hoped to confine this to 2 hours. We're a bit over that now. Poll number 3, please. And this is calculated to see the participation at this webinar, to see exactly who was listening and what bracket or sector they belong to. I apologize that we are segmenting like this, but we have seen that there's now a new protocol on female gender and young people under the AFCFTA. So we have to pander to that as well. It's a very good selector. Poll number 3 is the final poll. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have been able to assist us with this. Together with answers to questions on Q&A, this will guide not just operators, but various groups, interest groups, and sectors in their thinking on standards and mutual recognition agreements. So if we round up that poll, we will move on quickly to Q&A. I will announce the results of the polls after Q&A. So we have 6 questions altogether in this order. The first question is, what is SON doing to avoid multiple regulations and enhance trade? For instance, food and drugs are within the regulatory purview of another agency. What is being done to synergize effort and reduce regulatory burden of manufacturers and MSMEs, and ultimately to promote trade? That question is for Mrs. Arumeni. I'm going to read out all the questions and then we'll take them one by one. There's a general question. It says, can you oblige us with the presentations afterwards, please? I can answer that question. Very simple one. Yes. Question number 3. Do we have a conformity assessment committee, i.e. ASO-CACO, that is attempting to harmonize conformity assessment procedures and structures for the continent? Are there any tips you could give that could improve our success? I think that's almost going to be ASO territory. Question 4. Regional economic committees have been relatively successful in increasing trade in different regions, the EAC, ECOWAS, etc. Can we escalate this to continental level? I think anyone can take a stab at that. And the 5th question is, one of the lowest hanging fruits of the AFCFTA is the mobility of skills. In this regard, I am focusing on vocational skills. In the situation of formal economic migration, how exactly is the issue of vocational skills mobility handled under the AFCFTA. Between Rebecca and shall we say, ASO, and if Rambod has anything to chip in from his studies on the AFCFTA, we'll be expecting a response. And the sixth and final question is, thank you, Rebecca. Should MRAs provide for possible trade disputes that may arise from long-standing border issues? Very, very delicate question, but it is aimed directly at Rebecca. So those are the questions, panelists. Who's going to take the first one?
Thank you, Mr. Behboodi. May I take the first one?
Please, please.
Okay. Thank you, Samson Fatoki, for your question. This question is nothing new. It's been very recurrent, but I would like to say that to start with, both agencies were established by the federal government of Nigeria as a means to ensure a holistic assurance of food safety. And so you find that SON and NAFDAC, like every other country in the world, exists for the purpose of ensuring that food is safe. You have in every country a Food and Drug Administration, and you also have the National Standards Body. So what we have in Nigeria is not peculiar to us. However, both agencies, like I said, are mandated to ensure that when it comes to issue of food, they work hand in hand. For example, NAFDAC and NAFDAC regulations are referenced when it comes to standards development for food. And when it comes to drugs, I want to also inform you, in case you are not aware, that the SON also has a National Technical Committee and a Mirror Committee also on African traditional medicine. And NAFDAC is a member of that committee. And so you find that if both of us have to work like you have noted, what we have done is there is a standing committee that was established to harmonize our operations. So if, for example, someone comes to your factory and the NAFDAC has already issued a test report, we are not going to restart the whole process of testing for the same purpose, except if there are parameters that has not been covered within the scope of the test. And then we will highlight those aspects that we require within the scope of the standard and request samples to test those parameters. I hope I've been able to answer your question. So the next time you see SON officers coming to your facility, I want you to open your doors to them. First, not because it's a government policy and regulatory requirement, but also as part of your citizens' responsibility to ensuring that we are able to check that what you are doing aligns with the requirements of the standard and regulations as part of your obligation. And by the time we do that, you will find that the issues of exporting our products out of the country will no longer be a challenge, because we would have established that integrity that is desired by countries when they want to import from Nigeria. Thank you very much. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you. As Ms. Armemi has done, she's published her details. These slides will be passed on to every participant and you can take up further issues that relate to her remit when you do make contact with her. Thank you very much, madam. Our next question relates to the harmonization of assessments and the assessment committees. Is also willing to take that?
So it was responded to. It was addressed by Rambod, and Rambod explained to Caroline, who is actually the chair of ARZO Conformity Assessment Committee. Yeah, Rambod has responded directly online.
Oh, great. Oh, great. I missed that. Thank you. Right. Now we get to the question on RECs and how we're going to upscale RECs, whether in fact we need to upscale them is another portion of that question.
I think RECs are as the pillars, actually, they are the pillars of AFCFTA, and they form actually the leadership of the AFCFTA or the top management of RECs, either executive secretary or secretary general, as they are called. Yeah, they have meetings to shape the AFCFTA. I think the lessons learned from the RECs are very important as we are discussing the mutual recognition arrangement. I think one of the points that Rambod also touched on was the designation of the conformity assessment body. That's what has been successful within the regional economic communities. I think those are the lessons that can be taken up at the AFCFTA level. Thank you.
Thank you. And next question is the low-hanging fruit and mobility of skills, especially vocational skills. Who's going to take that for us?
Well, I can. So, yeah, this is a very low-hanging fruit, as you have correctly said, but mobility of skills would come under the service purview of trade under the AFCFTA. So how this is going to work is that for you to be able to provide skills across border, you would have to fit in whatever services or skills you have, would have to fall in line into one of the 4 modes of service supply under the AFCFTA, either by providing the services across border from wherever you are. So the service can move if it's of that nature. And sometimes the service is such that the consumer will have to travel to enjoy the service across the border. Another way to provide the services under the AFCFTA is to establish commercial presence in your target market. And then lastly, the professional or the skills provider would then go physically to his target market to provide the service. So yeah, it's a low-hanging fruit. It's a matter of making people understand how those skills can move under the continental trade. And of course, right now, the continent is focusing on 5 priority service sectors. I think if we continue to track how the negotiations and implementation progresses, you know just when and how to move into your target market. So that's a very low-hanging fruit, and I agree on that. I hope that answers your question.
If I may,
To add to that, there is also a protocol to the treaty establishing the African Economic Community that is relating to free movement of persons, right of residence, and the right of establishment. That's also protocol. It's just the level of signing. It's not the same as the level of the way the agreement of CFTA went, but it's a protocol that will also help the movement of people, free movement of people at the continent.
Let me just add a note of caution here. Depending on what we mean by vocational skills and the nature of the services that are being offered, it is in fact the case that the more we liberalize economies to allow for the provision of transboundary provision of services, the more the domestic regulatory framework needs to be developed. Many of our domestic regulatory frameworks for service providers are now concentrated on domestic certifications, basically being able to monitor domestic development and education. And the moment you have others come in from other countries, you have to change entirely the way you look at the domestic market and the way you look at other markets. If you can't keep service providers out, you need to be able to monitor them better and monitor their performance better. So there is a this is not to say that this is not a low-hanging fruit. It is just to say that it's a low-hanging fruit that still requires a couple of ladders before you can benefit from it fully.
Next question will be Rebecca's, if I am not mistaken.
So I think this came from Paul Ayola. He was talking about border issues. Border issues are quite wide. I don't know which aspect of border issues you're referring to, because they could relate to border control, border security, migration, trade, and authorized operation scheme. Whichever way you're looking at it would have to be specific on what would fit for an MRA. But usually some of these issues are issues that are dealt with on bilateral trade agreement basis and not necessarily MRAs. MRAs are more on the issues of standards, assessments, and criteria-based issues. So it would depend on which aspects of border issues they are specifically referring to. That would help in judging whether MRAs are the best strategies to adopt in dealing with such issues.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca. We have now spent a grand total of 2 hours and 23 minutes at this webinar. It can go on forever if we allow these panelists to go on. But there is one unique thing that needs to happen for a webinar like this to be a success or considered to be one. And I'm going to let each one of our panelists have 2 minutes, no more. Please time yourself. At 2 minutes, we will cut. 2 minutes to tell us what is the takeaway from this webinar. What shall we tell other people who have not attended we took away from what you have said this webinar? Mrs. Arumemi, are you going to start? Please. Mrs. Arumemi, you have the floor. That picture is frozen. Can we move on to, okay.
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm ready.
Yes, let's go.
Our closing shot from son is nothing more than to request our esteemed MSMEs to be involved in standards development. Request for standards for production. And if you are a consumer, request for evidence of compliance to standards through certification. One standard, one test, one certification accepted everywhere is trending and is going viral. You need to participate to be able to trend along with it. Let us know about your manufacturing, trade, and investment activities to enable government provide all the necessary support that you need through SON. And I did display our pictures, our telephone contacts, email addresses. You should reach me and take you to the right source where you can get all the service that you need. Thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you.
Bye.
I can assure all our participants that Mrs. Arumemi is infinitely reachable. And so is the Director General, I'm sure. Thank you.
Yes.
Can we have Rambod for his own 2-minute quip? Rambod, are you there? You have the floor. And your 2 minutes is running.
There you go. Sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to a great audience, to speak with an esteemed panel. I think the first takeaway is that the AFCFTA provides a fantastic platform for Pan-African trade, and not just that, but Pan-African development, Pan-African export development. Number one. Number two, the Pan-African issues and institutions cannot be separated from domestic governance matters, as the answer I gave to the question that Caroline had about conformity assessment bodies. And so what we need to concentrate on is capacity building, not only at the continental level, but also capacity building, technical assistance, and governance reform at the level of governments. And the third point, I go back to what Mrs. Aramimi said at the outset, and what you're doing and what we're doing is that the education and capacity building involvement is not simply top down. It has to be at the level of enterprises that have a stake in standards, in technical regulations, and in SPS measures. And we can't expect small and medium-sized enterprises to do this on their own. They need to develop capable associations. And if national associations are not strong enough, then they need to have Pan-African associations. And that might be something that a strengthened AFCFTA framework can provide. Truly Pan-African associations that represent the interests of their sectors and of the SMEs. And that's where I will stop.
Thank you, Rambod. If I may just add some little nugget to that, it is that the business of standards should not be relegated to the lower rungs of any institution or company. That Absolutely. Is perhaps one of our biggest issues. The decision-making is done at the top, but the implementation is done at the bottom. I think people have to promote the issue of standards to the highest levels that they can afford within their organizations. Thank you, Rambod. Rebecca?
Okay, so for me, I would say that it's important for people to continue to understand that standards development, MRAs, are collective efforts. Everyone needs to get involved in policy formulation. Consultations need to be wider than what people have known it to be. So it's important for everyone to get involved for this purpose. Also, it's important to build capacity as the African trade landscape continues to broaden. There will be need for diverse skills, products and services. It's important for people to know how these things work. If you still lack a little more understanding of how the trade is expected to run, I think you should seek knowledge. You should attend forums like this, where you get to share knowledge with other experts and you have the opportunities to ask questions. So basically, get involved and build capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. If anybody's lacks understanding, let them seek knowledge. Thank you very much. And of course, our distinguished Secretary General, what will you have us hear before we go home?
Yeah, I have just 2 points. Well, one is stakeholders engagement. Yeah, stakeholders engagement should be everywhere. Awareness creation, political leaders, private sector. It's really needed. Stakeholders engagement. The second one is avoid the duplication. Let's work towards the one standard, one test, one certificate. We have organization on the continent. We harmonize the standards. Let's use those standards. Let's build the capacity to have the trust of that test. One test. We deliver a certificate that is accepted by our other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. SG. We have very reluctantly come to the end of this webinar today, and I do not speak for just myself when I say it has not been a time wasted. Now, what has contributed to that, first and foremost, in my view, is the audience that has listened attentively and carefully to our panelists. We have had upwards of 90 people at some point present on in these proceedings, and we have seen from Q&A that the lessons and the messages were imbibed, and there was follow-up on the thinking. Thank you very much to all who have participated here. But of course, we did not call you to an empty party. We invited you to listen to Ambassador Fred Aga, who is Nigeria's the Director General of the Office of National Trade Negotiations, who has actually gone beyond, over and beyond what we were expecting, to tell us exactly where things stand today. So we are the first to consume some of the information that Ambassador Aga has delivered in his goodwill address. Next, of course, the keystone of standards in Nigeria, i.e. the Standards Organization, ably represented by Mrs. Arumemi, have also told us where to look for help. They are willing and waiting, and so we thank her very much for that. Rambod is an African friend. He's worked in many continents of the world, but he feels attached to the African experience on standards and in fact on trade. So we thank you very much, Rambod, for sparing the time and the effort to prepare for this. And we will call you again in the future, I am sure you know for sure. Rebecca is one of us at AELEX, but again, the energy that she has put into developing her slides and coordinating the setup of this program is remarkable. And I think we should also thank her. And therefore, without further ado, if I have not left anybody out, let me thank the AELEX deck for making sure that the continuity on this was seamless. And we do know that this is not the end of discussion on the subject. We will come back to you with all the slides as participants and as panelists so that you can add that to your library. But do more than that, spread it. We give you unlimited permission to circulate the material that has been used on this program. Thank you very much. And I have also opened the door. Anyone who needs to engage with any of our panelists can either go direct or come through AELEX. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and thank you.